The atmosphere in the arena had shifted dramatically. What started as a fight everyone assumed would be a quick, one-sided battle had turned into something completely unexpected. John, the human soldier, was still standing. He was bruised, sweating, and exhausted, but there was a spark in his eyes. The alien warrior girl, on the other hand, was no longer as confident as before. Her pride had been rattled, and she was beginning to doubt her own strength. The warrior girl, who had always been in control, now stood a little more cautiously. She gripped her sword tighter, her gaze locked on John, sizing him up. He had surprised her more than once, and that thought nagged at her. No human had ever done that before. She had faced countless enemies, but none had shown such resilience. John, though breathing heavily, didn't back down. He had taken hits, but he had also landed a few, and now he could see it. The moment of weakness in the alien warrior. She was no longer attacking with the same force or confidence. Her strikes were starting to lose the perfect timing she had shown earlier. She was letting frustration creep into her movements. For a brief moment, John caught his breath and quickly analyzed his surroundings. The arena was vast, with no place to hide, but there were subtle advantages. The pillars that lined the edges, the uneven ground. Every second counted now. Every move could be the one that either led to victory or defeat. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was planning his next steps. He had learned enough about his opponent to know that this fight wasn't won through brute force. It was about outsmarting her, exploiting her pride, and waiting for the perfect opening. The alien warrior noticed the change in John's stance. She saw the way he was moving, less frantic, more calculated. Something had shifted in him. He wasn't running from her anymore. He was preparing for the next strike, waiting for her to make the first mistake. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," she muttered under her breath, trying to mask the doubt creeping into her voice. She took a step forward, her sword raised again. John didn't flinch. Instead, he pushed off the ground and dashed toward her with sudden speed. The warrior's eyes narrowed, and she swung her sword at him, aiming for his midsection. John ducked under the swing, his body moving with precision, and before the alien could react, he grabbed her wrist again, twisting it. This time, however, he didn't stop there. With his free hand, he pushed her backward, using all his remaining strength to unbalance her. The warrior girl stumbled, caught off guard by his unexpected maneuver. She tried to regain her footing, but it was too late. John had already stepped back, putting some distance between them. For the first time, the alien warrior girl hesitated. She stood there, breathing hard, her pride wounded. She had underestimated him, and now she wasn't sure how to proceed. Her previous confidence was gone, replaced by a rare moment of vulnerability. John stood firm, his heart pounding in his chest, but a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He hadn't won yet, but he was getting closer. He had turned the tables. And now, the alien warrior could see it. The human wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was in this fight to win. The crowd, who had been unsure of John from the very start, was beginning to stir. What they had thought was impossible was now unfolding before their eyes. Could a human truly defeat this mighty alien warrior? The question lingered in the air, and for the first time, the answer seemed unclear. The warrior girl, still stunned, glared at him. "You think you've won," she growled, but even she could not hide the respect in her eyes. The arena was electric with tension, the air thick with anticipation. John, the human soldier, stood ready, his body aching from the blows he had endured. Sweat dripped from his brow, but his focus remained sharp. He had already shocked the crowd with his resilience, but now it was time for the final test. The alien warrior girl, once full of confidence, now stood before him with a look of pure determination. She had underestimated him, but she wasn't about to make that mistake again. The warrior girl raised her sword, the weapon crackling with energy. Her eyes locked onto John, and for a moment, the entire arena seemed to hold its breath. She was faster than him, stronger than him, but he had something she didn't, the will to keep going. "You've done well, human," she said through gritted teeth, her voice cold. "But this ends now." John didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had made it this far by relying on his wits, and he wasn't about to stop now. His heart pounded in his chest, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. But he couldn't afford to stop. The warrior girl was still a dangerous opponent, and this fight wasn't over yet. The alien warrior moved first, swinging her sword with deadly precision. The blade sliced through the air toward John's chest. But John was ready. With a quick step to the side, he narrowly avoided the blow. The crowd gasped, but there was no time to celebrate. The warrior was relentless. She didn't give him a moment to breathe. She followed up with a series of fast, brutal strikes. John could feel the air rushing past him as the blade came at him from every direction. His body moved on instinct now, ducking, dodging, rolling to avoid her furious attacks. His movements were getting slower, more tired, but he refused to give in. He couldn't. The warrior girl let out a battle cry and swung her sword in a wide arc. This time, John was caught off guard. The sword grazed his arm, leaving a long cut that burned with pain. He staggered back, his vision blurring for a moment. Blood dripped from his arm, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to let it slow him down. The warrior saw his blood, and for a moment she paused. It wasn't just the sight of his injury. It was the realization that this human wasn't quitting. He had been hurt, he was bleeding, but he wasn't breaking. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't going to stop until the fight was over. John took a deep breath, wiping his hand across his forehead. He was bleeding, exhausted, and every inch of his body felt like it was on fire. But the warrior girl was showing signs of fatigue too. Her strikes were becoming less fluid, her breath more labored. She was still strong, but she wasn't invincible. With the last of his strength, John rushed forward, using the pillars in the arena to propel himself with a burst of speed. The warrior's eyes widened in surprise as he closed the gap between them in an instant. She swung her sword, but this time, John anticipated the move. He ducked, grabbing her arm as it passed by. He twisted her arm with all the force he could muster, pulling her off balance. The warrior girl stumbled, her feet losing contact with the ground. It was now or never. With a final surge of energy, John pushed her, sending her crashing to the ground. The sword flew from her grasp, skidding across the arena. She lay there, stunned, breathing heavily. The crowd was silent, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. John stood over her, his chest heaving. He had done it. He had defeated the unbeatable warrior. The alien girl, who had once seen herself as untouchable, now lay on the ground, her pride shattered. John didn't say a word. There was no need. He had won, not with strength, but with strategy, resilience, and a refusal to quit. The crowd erupted into cheers, their disbelief turning into awe. They had never seen anything like this. The human soldier had done what no one thought possible. He had defeated the mighty alien warrior. But John wasn't thinking about the crowd or the cheers. He was thinking about the fight, about how far he had come, and how much he had risked. He had faced the impossible and come out victorious. The arena was slowly clearing, but the energy in the air was still electric. The echoes of the crowd's cheers lingered as the final moments of the battle played out in everyone's minds. John stood at the center, his body battered and bruised, but his spirit unbroken. He had fought with everything he had, and the victory wasn't just his own. It was a victory for humanity. The alien warrior girl, who had once been his fiercest opponent, now stood beside him. The two of them, once enemies, now shared something much more significant: mutual respect. It was a rare bond, forged in the heat of combat, and one that neither of them would forget. As the crowd finally began to disperse, John's thoughts began to settle. He had done it. He had shown the galaxy that humans were capable of more than anyone had ever thought. But now, The question lingered in his mind. What came next? The alien warrior girl, her armor still dented from the fight, stepped closer to John. "You've changed everything," she said quietly, her voice serious, but not without a trace of admiration. "You've shown the galaxy that strength is not always about power. It's about determination, will, and heart. And now, things will be different." John nodded, his eyes tired but determined. "I didn't do it for fame or glory. I did it to prove that humans have a place in this galaxy, just like anyone else." The warrior girl studied him for a moment before speaking again. "You've done more than prove your place, human. You've made us question everything we thought we knew. And that's something not many can do." John felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had feared that the fight would only be remembered for the spectacle, that it would be seen as just another battle. But now he knew it was more than that. It was a turning point, not just for him, but for all of humanity. The warriors, the leaders, the spectators, they had all witnessed what a human was capable of, and it would be hard for them to forget. "I never imagined this," John admitted, his voice soft. "I just thought I was trying to survive, to do what needed to be done. But now I see that the message is bigger than just me. It's about all of us." The warrior girl gave a small smile. "And the message is clear. Humanity is not to be underestimated." As they stood there, the arena now almost empty, John realized something important. This victory, this moment, wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The galaxy had just learned what humans were capable of, and that knowledge would change everything. But there was still so much to be done. The respect they had earned today would open doors. Doors to new opportunities, new alliances, and perhaps even new challenges. The warrior girl stepped back and raised her hand, signaling for one last moment of attention. "Let it be known," she said to the remaining crowd, her voice strong, "that this human has shown us what it means to fight, not just for victory, but for something greater than ourselves. Let this be the first of many steps toward understanding and cooperation." The crowd, though quieter now, nodded in agreement. The battle had been fierce, but its impact was far-reaching. The fight was over, but the message had just begun to spread across the galaxy, and with it, a new chapter for humanity. John glanced at the warrior girl one last time. They had fought each other to the brink, and now they stood together, united by the same truth. Humanity had a place in this universe, and it was no longer just about survival. It was about making a mark, proving that even in a galaxy full of powerful beings, humans could stand tall and be respected. With that, John turned and walked away from the arena, the weight of his victory still settling in his chest. This was only the beginning. The arena was still, the sounds of cheering and clapping slowly fading into the background. The dust from the battle settled, and all eyes were on John. His chest heaved with exhaustion, his blood-streaked arm hanging at his side, but he stood tall. He had won, but it didn't feel like a victory yet. It wasn't over. The alien warrior girl lay on the ground, her armor scratched and dirtied. Her sword had fallen far from her, and she was now staring up at John with a look of shock and disbelief. Her pride had been shattered. For the first time, she wasn't the one standing above her opponent. John looked down at her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. She had been stronger, faster, and better trained. Yet, somehow, he had managed to defeat her. It was hard to believe, but he had done it. And now, for the first time in the fight, he allowed himself to feel a small sense of relief. But the warrior girl wasn't going to stay down for long. She slowly pushed herself to her feet, wincing at the pain in her limbs. Her body was battered, her pride bruised, but she wasn't finished. Her eyes locked onto John, and he could see the fire still burning in them. Despite the defeat, despite the momentary weakness, she was a warrior through and through. You shouldn't have won," she said, her voice hoarse but full of venom. She wiped the blood from her lips, her gaze filled with determination. "You think you've proven something. You've only delayed the inevitable." John didn't respond immediately. He knew that whatever he said now wouldn't change anything. The fight had been hard. He had pushed himself beyond his limits, and the victory had come at a high price. But the warrior girl's words didn't affect him. He wasn't concerned about her pride. He was concerned about the fight that had just taken everything out of him. "You're not like the others," she said, her voice quieter now. "No human has ever faced me like this. You fought with skill and heart." John looked at her, his expression hardening. "I didn't fight you for glory. I fought because I had no other choice." The warrior girl's eyes softened just slightly. She had been certain of her victory, certain of her superiority. But now she wasn't so sure. The human before her wasn't like the others she had defeated. He was different. She had always believed that strength was the most important trait, but this fight had taught her that there were other things that mattered too. Things like strategy, resilience, and the will to keep going no matter the odds. The crowd, which had been silent since the battle ended, began to murmur. The tension in the air was palpable. People were unsure what to expect next. Would the warrior girl demand another round? Would she try to destroy John for his insolence? Or would she accept the truth? The human had won. The warrior girl stood still for a moment, staring at John, her expression unreadable. Finally, she took a deep breath and let the tension in her shoulders release. She straightened up, slowly lowering her weaponless hand. "Well fought, human," she said, her voice now tinged with respect. "I've never faced anyone like you." John's eyes narrowed as he considered her words. There was no smug smile on her face, no hidden threat. For the first time, the warrior girl had shown true respect. It was the kind of respect that only came from understanding. She knew now that strength wasn't always about size or power. Sometimes it was about pushing past the limits and surviving when everything else told you to give up. The crowd erupted into applause, loud and excited. John's victory had stunned everyone. They had watched a human do the impossible, and now they would never forget it. John, still breathing heavily, nodded slowly, then turned to walk away. The warrior girl didn't stop him. She didn't need to. The fight was over. And for the first time, the two combatants shared something more than rivalry. They shared respect, something that no one had expected from either of them. In a vast arena on an alien planet, under the watchful eyes of thousands of spectators from different species, a powerful alien warrior girl stood tall. Her muscles rippled beneath her battle armor, and the faint hum of energy fields filled the air. She was known across the galaxy for her unmatched strength and skill. The crowd cheered as she raised her weapon, a massive sword that gleamed under the harsh lights. Today, she wasn't just fighting for honor. She had issued a challenge. The warriors of countless species had come to test their might against her, but no one had ever dared to question her superiority. Today, she had a new target. "I challenge any human to face me in combat," she declared, her voice echoing through the arena. Her words were met with gasps from the crowd. Humans were seen as weak and fragile compared to the mighty warriors of the galaxy. It was said that they lacked the strength and resilience needed for combat. The alien warrior's challenge seemed almost laughable. She stood there, confident and unyielding, her gaze scanning the crowd. No one moved. The humans watching from the stands exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to react. Could a human even stand a chance against this force of nature? Then a man stepped forward. His name was John. He wasn't a soldier, nor was he a trained fighter. He was an ordinary man, someone who had never expected to find himself in such a situation. But something about the warrior's arrogance stirred something deep inside him. Maybe it was the way she dismissed humans so easily, or maybe it was his own curiosity about how far a human could go in a battle like this. "I'll take your challenge," John said, his voice steady but full of uncertainty. The crowd fell silent, shocked by his boldness. A human stepping up to fight one of the strongest beings in the galaxy. It seemed like a death sentence. The alien warrior girl raised an eyebrow at John's declaration. She didn't believe for a second that this human would last long. Her eyes narrowed, her grip tightening around her sword. She was ready to end this quickly, to show the galaxy once again why she was unbeatable. John walked into the center of the arena, his heart racing, but his mind focused. He had no illusions of winning this fight easily. He knew he wasn't physically stronger than the alien warrior, but he had something else, determination. And that, he hoped, would be enough to survive. The crowd watched with bated breath as the two faced each other. The tension in the air was thick, the silence almost deafening. The warrior girl smirked, her lips curling with amusement. John stood still, breathing deeply, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts in his head. The fight had just begun, but already the entire galaxy was watching. What would happen when a human faced an alien warrior like no other? No one knew, but one thing was certain. This wasn't going to be an ordinary fight. The arena buzzed with excitement, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. John stood across from the alien warrior girl, his hands slightly trembling, but his face set in determination. The alien warrior was ready, her large sword resting on her shoulder, her eyes gleaming with confidence. "You'll regret this," she taunted, her voice cold as she stepped forward, the crowd falling into a hush. John didn't answer. He knew that words wouldn't help him now. He needed to focus, to figure out a way to survive this fight. The warrior girl was known for her speed and skill, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could avoid her attacks. But he had no choice. He had to keep his calm and think fast. The warrior girl suddenly lunged forward, her sword swinging through the air with lightning speed. The force behind the strike was terrifying, and John barely managed to dodge it, feeling the air rush by him as the blade missed by inches. The crowd gasped, impressed by her speed and power. John stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew the next strike would be just as fast, just as deadly. There was no room for mistakes. The warrior girl didn't pause. She came at him again, her sword slashing downward. This time, John managed to jump to the side, narrowly avoiding the blow. He landed on the ground with a roll, his feet sliding on the dust-covered floor of the arena. The alien warrior growled in frustration. She had expected her first strike to end it. Humans were weak after all. But this one, he was quick. He wasn't like the others. She watched him carefully, noticing how he was using his surroundings to his advantage. John wiped the sweat from his brow. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. The warrior was relentless, but he noticed something about her moves. She was fast, yes, but there was a pattern to it. Each strike was powerful, but it had a rhythm. She relied on her strength and speed, but she wasn't as unpredictable as he had feared. The warrior girl growled again, preparing for another strike. John's mind raced. He couldn't let her corner him. His best chance was to move in quickly, surprise her with a counterattack. When she swung her sword toward him again, he didn't back away. Instead, he charged at her. The crowd gasped. What was he doing? John dove to the side, aiming to grab her arm and pull her off balance. To his surprise, his move worked. The warrior girl stumbled slightly, her footing disrupted for just a moment. It wasn't much, but it was enough. John pushed himself to his feet, stepping back to reassess. The alien warrior girl blinked, stunned for a brief second. No one had ever managed to make her lose her stance like that. Her eyes narrowed, now filled with both surprise and a hint of respect. The human wasn't just running or hiding. He was learning. But she was still the stronger of the two. She would not be defeated easily. Nice try, human, she sneered, raising her sword again. But it will take more than that. John didn't respond. He knew the battle was far from over. The first round had been a test, and he had survived. But he needed more than just survival. He needed to find a way to win. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their expectations slowly shifting. Perhaps this human was more than they had given him credit for. Perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't as weak as they had thought. The alien warrior girl stood tall, her eyes fixed on the human across from her. He had surprised her, no doubt, but she was far from impressed. This human had only managed to break her rhythm once. He was quick, but he lacked the strength to truly challenge her. She had fought in battles across galaxies, defeated the fiercest of foes, and earned her reputation. No human could ever surpass her. "You think you can outsmart me?" she sneered, gripping her sword tightly. "I've fought beings far stronger than you, human. You will fall, just like the rest." John remained silent, his chest heaving with each breath. He could feel the sting of the sweat dripping down his face, the strain of each dodge. He had no illusions about the warrior's strength. She was an unstoppable force, a skilled fighter, and a natural predator. He had no weapons, no armor, just his wits. But as he stood there, trying to steady his breath, something clicked in his mind. He realized that it wasn't just about strength. He wasn't going to win by fighting her with raw power. No, he had to be smarter, quicker, and more strategic. If he could find the right moment, the right weakness, he could do more than just survive. He could make her doubt herself. The warrior girl was watching him carefully, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't used to being so cautious. She had fought countless enemies, and none had ever dared to challenge her like this human. He wasn't giving up, wasn't breaking under pressure. It was both infuriating and interesting. "You're not like the others," she admitted, her voice cold but with a hint of respect. "But respect won't save you in the end." John didn't reply. Instead, he focused on her movements, studying every little detail. The way she shifted her weight, the way her sword cut through the air. It was a pattern, a rhythm, and if he could learn to anticipate it, he might just stand a chance. The crowd watched in silence, wondering how much longer the human could last. They were starting to see something in him that they hadn't before. He wasn't just running from her blows. He was thinking, adapting. It wasn't enough to win yet, but it was something. The warrior girl, sensing that the human was trying to figure her out, decided to take the fight to a new level. She charged at him again, faster this time. Her sword moved like lightning, slashing through the air in a deadly arc. John barely had time to react. He ducked, feeling the edge of her blade skim past his ear. But this time, he was ready. As she overextended with the swing, he saw his opening. With a quick move, he slid under her blade, narrowly avoiding it, and came up behind her. The warrior girl stumbled, caught off guard by his sudden shift in movement. The crowd gasped. The human had managed to get behind her. It was a small victory, but to the spectators, it was enough to make them question everything they thought they knew about humans. They had underestimated him, and that mistake was starting to cost them. The warrior girl growled, turning quickly to face him. She was frustrated now, but she still held the advantage. The human was quick, yes, but she was still stronger, more experienced. He had surprised her once, but she wouldn't let it happen again. "Impressive," she said through gritted teeth, "but don't think for a second that I'll let you win." John stood ready, his mind racing. The battle was far from over. But now, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting to win. The noise from the crowd echoed around the arena, a mixture of shock, awe, and disbelief. John stood there, his chest rising and falling with each heavy breath, his bloodied arm still hanging by his side. The alien warrior girl, now on her feet, watched him from a distance, her eyes no longer filled with anger or disdain, but something different, something unexpected. Respect. John had thought that defeating her would be enough, that the fight would end with the alien warrior bowing in defeat. But now, as he looked at her, standing tall despite the bruises and cuts on her body, he realized that the victory wasn't as simple as he had imagined. The respect between them now held more weight than any battle could. The warrior girl took a slow step forward, her expression calm but intense. She wiped the sweat from her brow and met John's gaze. "You have shown me something I never expected," she said, her voice steady. "You fought not just with your body, but with your mind and heart. You are not the weak creatures I once thought you to be." John's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected this. He had fought to survive, to prove that humans were capable of more than others thought. But now, hearing the warrior girl speak like this, he felt a sense of pride. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about showing them that humans weren't to be underestimated. You weren't what I expected either," John said, his voice hoarse but sincere. "I thought I'd be dead long before this. But you fought with everything you had. And that's what made this fight something more than just a battle." The warrior girl's lips twitched, as if she was fighting a smile. It wasn't often that she received compliments, especially not from someone she had just fought. But now, in this moment, she understood. Strength didn't just come from power or speed. It came from knowing when to fight and when to give respect. John had earned both from her. The crowd had begun to calm down, though their eyes were still locked on the two combatants. No one had expected the fight to turn out this way. They had all thought the human would fall quickly, that the alien warrior would dominate. But John had defied every expectation. He had stood his ground, outlasted her, and won in a way no one could have predicted. The warrior girl straightened, looking around at the audience. She raised her hand, silencing the whispers and gasps. "This human," she said, her voice loud and clear, "has shown us that strength is not just about power. It is about heart. He has won not through force, but through his will to survive." The crowd fell silent again. This was more than just a simple fight. The warrior girl was admitting, in front of thousands, that the human had beaten her, not because he was stronger, but because he had something she hadn't expected. And for that, he deserved respect. John stood still, not knowing how to respond. He had been in battles before, but this was different. He had won, but in a way he hadn't imagined. He hadn't just beaten a foe. He had earned the respect of a warrior who was once seen as unbeatable. As the warrior girl took a step back, she nodded to John. "You are different, human. I look forward to seeing how far you can go." Her tone was not mocking or dismissive. It was genuine. And for the first time in the fight, John felt like he had earned something real, something more than just survival. The crowd, after a long pause, erupted into cheers. John, standing in the center of the arena, finally allowed himself a small, weary smile. He had done it, not just for himself, but for all of humanity. He had shown them that humans were capable of greatness, something that no one would soon forget. The air in the arena felt heavier now, the silence broken only by the distant murmur of the crowd. The human soldier, John, stood facing the alien warrior girl, his body aching with every movement. Sweat stung his eyes, but he kept his focus. He had managed to surprise her once, but that wasn't enough. He needed to keep her on edge, to make her doubt herself. The warrior girl was no longer underestimating him. Her previous cocky smile had faded, replaced by a focused scowl. She knew that the human wasn't just lucky. He was dangerous in his own way. For the first time, she felt a hint of uncertainty. Could this human actually be a threat? The alien warrior's sword crackled with energy as she swung it through the air, sending a shockwave toward John. He reacted instantly, ducking and rolling to the side, the sword narrowly missing him. The warrior growled in frustration. She had expected him to dodge, but she hadn't expected him to do it so smoothly. The human had become more than just a nuisance. He was starting to show promise. John knew he couldn't keep dodging forever. The warrior girl's strikes were getting faster, and he was running out of space to move. His heart raced, but his mind remained clear. He watched her every move, looking for the perfect moment to strike. He knew her pattern by now. She was powerful, but predictable. She came at him again, this time with a series of rapid slashes. John stepped back, avoiding the first few, but as she swung the sword toward him again, he saw his chance. The warrior girl had overextended herself just a little bit. In that split second, John made his move. With a burst of speed, he darted toward her, not away from her. The warrior's eyes widened as she saw him coming. Before she could react, John reached out, grabbing her wrist in a quick, calculated move. He twisted her arm, using her own momentum against her. For the first time, the alien warrior was off balance. The crowd gasped, unsure of what was happening. John didn't waste a moment. Using the grip on her arm, he pulled her toward him and kicked her legs out from under her. With a hard thud, the warrior girl hit the ground, her sword flying from her grasp. She was stunned, momentarily disoriented by the human's unexpected move. John stood over her, panting and sweating, but there was no time to celebrate. The warrior girl's eyes flashed with fury as she quickly rolled to her feet, her expression now a mix of rage and disbelief. You actually think you can defeat me?" She spat, her voice full of venom. John didn't answer. He couldn't afford to. He knew that this was just the beginning of her retaliation. The fight was far from over. But as he stood there, looking down at the warrior girl, he realized something. He hadn't just survived another round. He had gained ground. For the first time, he had made her lose control. The alien warrior, now fully aware of how dangerous the human was, took a step back, reassessing the fight. She had never faced an opponent like this before. A human, with no special powers or abilities, had somehow thrown her off balance. Her pride, her reputation, everything she believed in, was beginning to crack. The crowd was silent. They were witnessing something no one had ever expected. The human soldier was holding his ground. The question now was, how much longer could the alien warrior continue to underestimate him? The arena buzzed with excitement, the once stunned crowd now roaring with applause. John stood at the center, bloodied but unbowed, his chest heaving with each breath. He had just defeated one of the most feared alien warriors in the galaxy, and the victory was not just his. It belonged to humanity. The cheers filled the air, but John barely heard them. His mind was still racing from the battle. His body ached, and the adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind an exhausting calm. The alien warrior girl, now standing a few steps away, looked at him with a mix of admiration and something else. Perhaps it was a sense of understanding. She had expected this human to fall easily, to show weakness, but instead he had endured, fought, and in the end, won. In the midst of the cheering crowd, she took a step forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "Human," she called out, and the crowd fell silent once again. All eyes turned to her, the warrior who had ruled the arena for so long, now acknowledging her defeat. This human has shown us that strength is not just in muscles or speed. It is in the heart, in the will to fight, no matter the odds. No one here should ever underestimate humanity again. The words hung in the air, and the crowd was still, uncertain of how to react. The warrior girl, still catching her breath, continued, "He may not be the strongest or the fastest, but he is the bravest. He has earned my respect, and I believe the respect of all who have witnessed this." John looked around, his heart racing. He hadn't expected this. He had expected some form of victory, but not this recognition. It was more than just the battle. It was the acknowledgement that humanity, for all its flaws and perceived weaknesses, had something to offer that no one had anticipated. The alien warrior girl turned to face the crowd, raising her hand to signal for silence once more. This human has not only won today, but he has also shown the galaxy something important, that no matter where we come from, we all have the ability to change the course of fate. No one species is better than the other. We are all capable of greatness. The crowd, which had been uncertain moments before, erupted into applause. The cheers were loud and filled with newfound respect. John had done more than just survive. He had changed perceptions, and now the alien warriors and spectators were beginning to understand. They had seen the human spirit in action, and it had left a mark on all of them. As the applause grew, John turned to the warrior girl. She stood there, looking at him not with the eyes of an enemy, but with the eyes of someone who had seen his strength and now respected it. There was no malice in her gaze, only recognition. "You were right," John said quietly, his voice steady despite the exhaustion. "I didn't fight you for glory. I fought because I had to. And now, I know humanity has something to prove." The warrior girl nodded slightly, her posture softening. "And you have proven it. We are all capable of more than we know." The fight was over, but its impact was just beginning. John had not only defeated the alien warrior girl, but he had also opened the eyes of those watching. The idea that humans were weak or insignificant was gone. He had shown them that humanity, for all its differences, had strength, resilience, and courage that no one could ignore. The arena emptied slowly, but the message lingered in the air. Word of the battle would spread across the galaxy, and wherever it went, people would remember the human who stood against the odds and won, not just the fight, but the respect of those who once thought him beneath them.